This is Steve with Rocky Mountain ATV MC, and today I'm going to show you how to install Racetec's Gold Valve kit in the Showa steering damper. The Showa steering dampener is available for a number of different bikes. Whether you're doing off-road or moto, it's definitely something you're going to want to have to get rid of head shake. Now, these dampers are under-dampened, and Racetec makes a really good kit to give you more dampening and more adjustability. Now, the Showa steering dampener comes in two different sizes, one being a 20mm and one being a 24mm. So when you go to order your Racetec kit, make sure that you order the right size for the dampener that you have. Now, the kit comes with everything that you need, including some instructions with a chart, and in this chart, it allows you to make the adjustments for a soft, standard, or hard setting to suit your needs. So today I'm going to show you how to install one of these on a 20mm Showa dampener, but it is the same as the 24mm dampener as well. To do this job, you're going to need some basic hand tools, a torque wrench, a file, a caliper, some snap ring pliers, along with an oil pan, gloves, safety glasses, and rags. You'll also need some oil and some grease, and you'll also need your kit from Racetec. Now keep in mind that these kits can be mounted to your bike a number of different ways. Obviously, like this bracket would be for a KTM, so that you can, or a Husky, that you can mount it to that. The one on this Yamaha, it mounts to the frame and then obviously to the triple clamp. So just keep that in mind when you're removing and installing it, that it could be mounted a number of different ways. So let's go ahead and remove this dampener and we will go ahead and pull it apart. Now that we've got that removed, let's go ahead and stick it in a vise. Now you're going to want to do that with the seal facing up, and I've got an oil pan directly below it so that it'll catch any oil that I spill as I disassemble it. Make sure to use a soft vise, as you could damage the steering dampener body. First we'll use a little suspension clean and go ahead and clean it off. Now it doesn't have it in the instructions, but I'm going to go ahead and back off the adjuster, and that'll allow, when I drain all the oil out of it, that all the oil will get out much easier than it would if you had your adjuster all the way in. Now let's remove our retaining clip from our dampening shaft assembly. Next we can remove the dampener shaft and valving from the housing. Now we'll remove it from the vise and pour out our oil. Now let's grab the smaller bolt that comes in the kit and thread it into the reservoir cap. We'll go ahead and press down on it, and then we'll remove the retaining clip. Now let's take the larger bolt that comes in the kit, and we're going to go ahead and thread that into the floating piston that's inside. And remove it. Now let's remove the dampening housing from the vise and go ahead and take our dampening rod assembly, and we'll go ahead and spray that off with some suspension clean. And clamp it in the vise. Now the next step is very important. What they've done is, when they installed the nut, they put a peen here which basically mushrooms this out slightly so that the bolt won't back off. And so we need to take a file and file this down so that we can remove this nut. Just be very careful when you do this. Now that we've filed that down, let's go ahead and remove the nut. Now let's grab our file again and go ahead and chamfer the edges of the shaft so that when we reinstall everything, it will go on smoothly. Now let's remove the valve stack and lay each part out in order as we disassemble it. Now that we have it completely disassembled, it's time to clean and inspect all of our original parts. Now that we have everything clean, let's go ahead and inspect everything. Take the housing, go ahead and look at the inside of that and make sure there's no damage there, along with your floating piston. Now the shaft, if there's any damage there, you're going to want to replace it. Now you can replace some of the parts individually, not everything, but you can replace some of them. So if you have an O-ring or something like that, you can go ahead and replace that individually. Make sure to check out your slider and the seal part of that. Now all the shims, what you're looking for there is if over time they'll flex and they'll stay that way and they won't return. And if that's the case, then that shim would need to be replaced. Now if you look here at the difference between the stock valve and the gold valve, they are slightly different. The gold valve ports are slightly bigger, allowing more oil to flow, so then you can change the shim stack to compensate for that, which actually gives you more adjustability. You just need to make sure that when we reassemble it that it is facing the right way so that the compression side and the rebound side are on the correct sides. Let's start the reassembly process by clamping our shaft into the vise. Now let's install our seal head and base plate. We'll use a little Race Tech grease. Now when you do this, you just need to be really careful because you don't want to cut the seal obviously, but it will slide right over that. Just be very careful. Now if you look at the base plate, we're putting this stuff back on the same way that it came off. If you look at it, one side's round and one side's flat with kind of a sharp edge. Obviously the shims are going to go against this, which would make more sense, and that's why, you know, as we took it off, it'll go back on the same way. Now at this point, we're ready to build our compression and rebound valve stack. Based on our chart, we have a soft, standard, and hard. We've elected to use the hard setting to give us the most dampening possible. Race Tech recommends that you use the middle stack or the C2 or R2 stack if you haven't had any experience with this kit. You can always go back and change the shim stack later if you would like. Now keep in mind that you will use some of the stock shims along with the new shims from Race Tech, so pay attention to that. And when we do this, we'll use our caliper to measure the thickness and the outer diameter, and in the chart it shows you how many you need to use and the size of the shim as you build your stack. So for an example, you can see the outer diameter is 16 millimeters. Now we can use that as the reference to the chart to go ahead and build our stack the correct way. Now let's build our compression valve stack. That'll be the first one that we need to build, and then we will do the valve and then the rebound valve stack. We're going to reuse 3 of the 16 millimeter outer diameter shims, and then we will use a 9 millimeter, a 12 millimeter, a 15 millimeter, and 5 17 millimeters. Now these shims aren't directional, they can go either way. The only time that would play a role is if the shim already has wear on it and it has flex and you don't have another shim to reuse, then that may be a factor when rebuilding it, but everything is in great shape and so it shouldn't matter. Now let's just start stacking the shims. 3 16 millimeter, a 9 millimeter, 12 millimeter, 15 millimeter, and then 5 17 millimeter shims. Now we need to install the gold valve. Now these gold valves are directional. You have small ports on this side and you've got larger ports on this side. The instructions tell us to put the large ports facing down towards the compression stack. So that is the direction that we need to install it. Now we need to build the rebound stack. For our slowest setting on the rebound, we will install 9 17 millimeter shims, and then 1 15, 1 12, and 1 9. And the last 2 are the base plate and the nut, and that will be the rebound stack. So let's go ahead and install those. Now again, with the base plate, you want the sharp edge down, the flat surface against these shims. Now the kit comes with some thread locker, so we'll go ahead and use that and put a little bit on the inside of the nut and go ahead and torque that to 30 inch-pounds. Now that we've torqued that, let's go ahead and re-inspect our shim stack and clean it one last time before we install it. and go ahead and clamp the housing back into the vise. Now I need to fill the reservoir completely full with ultra slick fork oil 5-weight. Now let's take the large bolt in the kit and our reservoir piston and go ahead and thread that back into it. We'll apply a small amount of the grease to the O-ring. Now remember to put your oil pan below this because you're going to have excess that flows out of it. We're going to install the reservoir piston and you want oil to pass by so that you don't get any air bubbles. Just take your time with this. Now you want to press it all the way down to the very bottom of the reservoir. Now if the main body isn't completely full of oil, go ahead and top that off. You just want to make sure that it's all the way up there so that when we reinstall the valve body, we don't have any air bubbles. Now we'll just unthread the bolt from the piston and install our spring and our reservoir cap. Now apply a little bit of grease to the O-ring and we'll go ahead and install that. And now our circlip. Now remove the screw. Now let's take our wear ring, we'll apply a small amount of grease to it and install it onto our valve. And then we'll slide it into the housing. Now be careful when doing this, you want to just take your time and work slowly. You don't want to create bubbles from it and cycle it back and forth to work out all the air bubbles. Now that you've done that, we'll top off the main body with oil and then we'll go ahead and install the seal. Now when installing the seal head, these things are kind of stubborn. So just take your time, be careful. If you need another set of hands, that will make things much easier. Now that we've got the snap ring installed, let's go ahead and spray it off and clean everything, and then we'll check the function. Now that we've got that cleaned off, let's go ahead and check the function of it. Go ahead and press all the way down on it and then let off. Now it should return all the way to the top. If it doesn't return all the way to the top, that means you have an air bubble in there and you need to disassemble it and then redo that process to get all of the air out. Now, I have the adjuster backed all the way out. You can go ahead and turn it all the way in and press it again and you'll see the difference between this position and with that all the way in and how slow that returns. That's going to show us that it's actually dampening and slowing that down. All right, now that we've got that in, we'll go ahead and press it all the way down. Now you see how much slower it is to extend the rod all the way out. That is because it is dampening more than it was in the stock form. Now I have a stock OEM Showa dampener right here. I'm also going to clamp in the vise and you can see the difference between the two in the hardest setting. Now let's adjust the stock Showa one all the way in and press down on both of them. And you'll see the difference. Now you can see that this one is coming up much faster, meaning it's dampening less. And this one is coming up much slower, meaning it's dampening more. And that's the real benefit about the gold valve, is you have way more dampening and way more adjustability. Now we just need to reinstall it back onto the bike and that's it. That's all there is to installing a gold valve in your Showa steering dampener. For parts like these and many more, come check us out at RockyMountainATVMC.com. And if you like what you see here, subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is Steve. We'll catch you next time.